of educational opportunities for the ISM Indirect Services Group, as well as a sourcing lead for the Bank of America. Take it away, Jewel.
Thank you very much, Lynn. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today for Business Process Outsourcing. Set yourself up for success. Presented by Nina Brown and hosted by the ISM Indirect Services Group to commemorate March as Supply Management Month. Just a reminder, this is a streaming-only presentation, which means that you will both see and hear the material through your computer. Please take a moment to adjust your computer speakers to a comfortable volume. You will be able to ask questions during the presentation. On the side of your screen, you should see a field labeled Questions. If you click there, a window will appear so that you may type in your question, and Nina will answer as many as possible through various points throughout the web seminar. After the web seminar, you will be sent an electronic survey by email. It will only take a few minutes to complete, so please respond, as the survey will assist the ISM Indirect Services Group to plan future educational events. 1 hour of continuing education credit is available to those who are attending today. A copy of the presentation slides are also available for everybody after the event. If you would like to receive a CEH form or a copy of the presentation, please let Lynn Marstiller know by replying to the email she will send to you with the electronic survey link. We will also have a copy of the presentation posted on the ISM Indirect Services Group website. Today's speaker is Nina Brown, Director of Engineering for DATAMARK. In that position, she oversees the company's business and software engineering departments, leading a team of Lean Six Sigma trained experts in the analysis and redesign of client business processes. While at DATAMARK, Nina has led the successful implementation of business process outsourcing services, as well as other large-scale business re-engineering projects for Fortune 500 companies. She also oversees the deployment of new technologies, tracking systems, and other process improvements that have reduced costs significantly for DATAMARK's clients. So please, everybody, welcome me in joining Nina Brown.
Hi there. Thanks, Jewel, for the introduction. And thank you, everybody, for joining. Hopefully, we will have an exciting session today talking about business process outsourcing and what are the various factors necessary in order to make a positive and successful outsourcing engagement. So just to take a minute about my company and what we do, we're based in El Paso, Texas, and have been in the business process outsourcing sector since 1989. Our client relationships are typically with large Fortune 500 companies, but we also work with many mid-market clients. We offer a wide range of BPO services, including mailroom management for corporations and contact center services, as well as business process reengineering consultations. Our core markets, as you can see, include health, insurance, and financial industries, as well as the transportation sector. And we are worldwide, so we have offices onshore, offshore, and nearshore locations to serve our customers in the location best made for them. So now on to what we are here to talk about today. So we're going to cover a few topics, including what is outsourcing. You may or may not be familiar with exactly what it is. There are a lot of misnomers out there, misconceptions about outsourcing, and so we'll cover that. And then we'll talk about how do I know if outsourcing is right for me, or if it's something that I should even be getting into, if my company should be getting into it or not. And in the event that it seems that it might be a good idea, we'll talk about what's the next step in terms of selecting the right provider. And when selecting that provider, how do I go about making the engagement a success? What do I need to put in place to make sure that in the end I'll be happy with the engagement overall? As Jewel mentioned, please feel free to ask questions. We'll try to field as many of them as possible. And otherwise, at the end of the presentation, I'll have my contact information so you can follow up with any additional questions you may have. So first, talking about outsourcing in general, as our little friend here is depicting outsourcing may sound enticing to just about anyone in any kind of arena. It can definitely seem like the easy path, the easy road, and it definitely can be something that's a very successful venture if it's approached in the right way with the right knowledge from the get-go. So, of course, there are two opposing sides. Some people say, yes, outsourcing is wonderful. Some people say, no, it's maybe not the right thing. So skipping right to the punchline and really the topic of our presentation as a whole, sometimes it makes sense and sometimes it doesn't. So that's what we are here to get to the bottom of. So first, to talk a little bit about what outsourcing is not, going over some of the misconceptions that are very, very common. So first off, it's really not a quick fix. As you'll see in the coming slides, it's something that can take a significant amount of time if all steps are followed thoroughly. So when you're looking at outsourcing, you need to look at it as part of a bigger picture, a much bigger corporate strategy, and ask all the right questions up front to be sure that you're addressing the whole story. Also, very commonly, it's thought of just a way to save money and often just an activity where the best price wins. So that may or may not be true. In the end, it may be the case that the best price is there, but there's really a lot more to consider. You keep in mind the common statement, you get what you pay for. That's very true even in the outsourcing arena. So do you want the bare minimum? Often the lowest cost is going to come along with just the bare minimum of requirements. Or do you want more flexibility? Do you want innovation? Do you want continuous improvement and other factors like that that might come into play? Well, all those things come at a price. So if you elect to outsource and select a provider purely on cost alone, well, likely you'll need to prepare yourself for some disappointment in the other areas. So also, it's not just something that you're going to toss over the fence and expect it to manage itself. If you're going to go into outsourcing, you want to be prepared with a vendor liaison that's going to keep the relationship on track according to original goals. And also, you need to be prepared to have proper governance in place. We'll talk a little bit more later on in the presentation about just what that governance means. But you want to be prepared to have that in place to ensure that not only contract practices, but also corporate practices are in line with the adopted outsourcing strategy. So what does that mean? Let's talk about an example. So for example, IT services and support is one area that is rising in the outsourcing arena. So imagine if a company elects to outsource these services and maybe even establishes a contract with some minimum guarantees that maybe seem perfectly reasonable, especially if the threshold is based on solid data and forecasting models. However, then imagine if all of the various departments in the company are not made aware of the agreement, or perhaps they're not in favor of the agreement for one reason or another. Maybe it requires an extra step to get the necessary support from this outsourced IT vendor, or they're just not really sure about it. So if those other departments continue to find their own solutions to IT support needs, finding individual contractors, paying rates according to their independent bids, well, now you're in a situation where the company made a step and you're outsourcing on one side and you're paying these minimum rates, but you're also paying the individual prices that departments are individually organizing on their own. So that all of a sudden now you're in a place where double things are happening, it's double cost going out. So it probably would have been better to recognize the need at the very beginning for the oversight and governance of that outsourcing strategy across the corporation to make that something solid. So right here we're looking at outsourcing leading to a steady state. And definitely you want to reach that steady state. We're going to talk about the transition when you move to an outsourcing vendor. And eventually your goal is to get to a steady state, but that's not the end of the story. So there's still a whole lot more that goes along with it, and outsourcing needs to be seen as a growing, ever-evolving practice that's going to change with the time. So especially these days where technology, for example, is constantly changing drastically, and consumers are calling for more and shinier opportunities, shinier offerings. You want to make sure that your partnership with your outsourcing vendor is staying current with those changing times and changing technologies. And it's not just a one-time thing, okay, we transitioned it and we're done and everything's happy. No, you want to, it's an ever-evolving partnership that you want to keep moving. And lastly, in the misconceptions here is that it might be a low-quality staff augmentation. Well, the difference here between staff augmentation and outsourcing is really the ongoing management by the outsourcing vendor. So it's not just, oh, I have too much volume right now, I have too much work, I can't handle it, I need some additional staff. That's the quick fix labor where you might want to go a different route, temp, workers, actual staff augmentation. That's not what we're looking at here. This is where you're hiring another provider to really take over that ongoing management and all of the associated facets that go along with that. Now, a lot of times when we're talking about staff aug or versus outsourcing, one of the misconceptions is, well, I can't really hire another company because they're not going to have the same top-notch skills that my people have. Well, there are ways to counter that as well. So, for example, you can hire to the same job profile, require your outsourcing vendor to hire to the same job profile. You can train with the same training programs that you've been using, and you can put all these measurements in place to be sure that those kinds of activities continue to happen. And of course, you would institute service level agreements, SLAs, that would ensure the high performance that you are used to with your own company. So now we've talked about what outsourcing is not. Let's talk a little bit about what it is. So really, outsourcing is an opportunity for a lot of different things. So first off, it's an opportunity that lets you really put more rigorous controls around the process. A lot of times it's easier for us to put more stringent controls on an outside agency. There might be a process that's been in-house for many, many years. And in a lot of those cases, the people doing the jobs have also been doing them for many, many years. So it's difficult to instigate change with those people. It's difficult when they've been doing it this way for years and years to all of a sudden put new controls around that process or try and redo that process. Well, a move to outsourcing can be a fresh start where processes are both reevaluated, both for efficiency and value adds, so that only the right and necessary functions are performed. And with a third-party company that expects to be strictly measured and held to the details of service agreements, it's very possible to ensure that the management structure is in place in order to establish tight controls. So the next opportunity we have is to really utilize best-in-class industry practices that have been perfected by providers. Now that goes along with a little bit of a caveat of we have to be willing to accept what am I good at, what are they good at, and let them excel, these other third-party providers, let them excel at what they do best while I do what I do best on my side of things in the meantime. And we'll talk a little bit more about that a couple of slides forward on understanding our core competencies. Also, it's definitely an opportunity to forge a long-term partnership. So that's really the best way to go into any outsourcing agreement. You don't just want to be looking at the short term, a year, 3 years, 5 years, and that's really what it's going to be, and that's going to be the end of it. Because at that point, you're stuck with what do you do next or where are we going to go. You want to be thinking of it as a long-term relationship where you're going to be excelling together. You're going to be establishing mutual benefits in your contract negotiations so that through the years, both sides are going to reap the benefits of that partnership. It's definitely an opportunity for reaping the benefits of extended hours. So when we're talking outsourcing, especially if we're talking the option of far shoring, well, now being on the opposite side of the globe, they have a completely different timeline. So where our first shift is early, that might be their third shift and vice versa. So where we might want to close at 5 p.m., they're barely getting started. And so we really would be able to utilize that additional processing time, possibly to bring better customer service to our customers that might be associated with being able to process in the middle of the night and get things processed more quickly. Also, along with that, of course, there's additional language options and extended business continuity plans that might be able to be in place by having some far-shore options or near-shore options in place. And then, of course, we want to free up, it's an opportunity to free up our internal resources that we may want to be repurposing to some of our more core functions. Well, now we can free them up because we get to utilize the expertise of the outsourcing providers, but we have to be thinking about that from the get-go. It's not just a matter of, okay, we outsource and so we're going to lay off a whole bunch of people. Well, no, what's the strategy behind now those resources are freed, which, by the way, might be people, it might be space, it might be equipment. What are we looking at in terms of now being able to repurpose those resources to more core functions? Lastly, and maybe the biggest known opportunity or cited opportunity by a lot of people who engage in outsourcing opportunities is to be able to leverage economies of scale. And this is where you can really start to get the cost savings because your providers are being able to utilize the same technology across multiple customers. They're able to utilize the same workflows across multiple customers. Once they've perfected one system, they can spread that across multiple customers and then thus pass on those possible cost savings to you. However, the caveat with that is you have to be willing to accept somewhat of standardized services. If you're asking for a different miracle with every turnaround of, no, I want my processes exactly like this, or I want my own technology completely different than everybody else, well, you'd be missing out on this opportunity because now the provider can't be spreading that across multiple clients. They would be gearing it specifically for you. So taking a look here at key outsourcing decision drivers, this is just a look at a study done by Horses for Sources last year on what are the key outsourcing decision drivers across ICO companies. So looking at some of these, of course, reducing operating costs is always leading at the top of the list, but there are definitely other really important factors when you're looking at an outsourcing decision. So just wanted to give you a brief glance at what that looks like, because that's something that you need to take back to your own company and decide, what is my key driver? What am I really trying to accomplish by an outsourcing decision? So moving on to talking about core competencies and what that means. So core competencies are really the capabilities that are performed especially well and are emphasized by the organization in a quest for a competitive advantage. And I read that directly from the slide because it's a really important concept to understand, and especially those last two words about competitive advantage. So there are a lot of functions that my company, your company, all companies are performing day in and day out. And some of they're very likely all very important for one reason or another. But which of those functions are really giving me my competitive advantage? That's really the key to being able to discern what might be outsourceable and what might not be outsourceable. So what are some of the factors necessary in order to be able to call something my competitive advantage? So just looking at a few of those, it needs to be valuable. It has to be, my customers need to be seeing some kind of value in it. It needs to be rare. If everybody on the block offered the exact same function, then it's not really giving me a competitive advantage over others in my industry. It needs to be difficult to imitate. If everybody can do it, again, it's not quite the same value add if it's easily attainable. And it needs to be something non-substitutable. So if it's something that I can do that I can just replace with something else and still have the exact same customer base, the exact same value to my customers, then that's not really my competitive advantage. If it's something that is the core of what my customers are coming to me for and can't be easily substitutable, then that's my competitive advantage. So once I understand what my core competencies are and how they relate to me with my customers, then I need to understand my corporate strategy and how I can support those core company goals. So there are a couple of pieces to that. The first is understanding the company's resources and capabilities. So the pieces of that are strengths and weaknesses. On the strength side, you want to understand the resources and capabilities that really allow the company to complete the important tasks. You know what your important tasks are, so what am I good at? What do I have to offer in my resources, in my capabilities that I can really complete those necessary functions? But then on the flip side of that, I also want to understand what are my weaknesses. What are, and this actually covers, even if it is part of my core competency, what am I not good at? Maybe I'm in a city that I can't find the right labor pool to complete a certain function that is very key to my organization. You know, what are those weaknesses? What is making it difficult for me to complete what I need to complete as a company? So once we understand all that, then we need to know, we need a strategy in order to acquire and maintain the resources needed to complete those. So here's where the big opportunity is. I've identified my strengths, I've identified my weaknesses, so now I can put my resources focused on what are the things that are really the strengths, what are the things that are really my core competencies, and free up other resources by moving out of the weakness area and finding some other coverage, potentially outsourcing, for the areas where I have weakness. So in understanding all of those, here's a graphic that I like to look at to help put into summary where my different processes might fall. So what might be ripe for outsourcing? And right here we're looking really at process complexity, where the easier it is, if it's a really redundant task, then it's really something that would be ripe for outsourcing down here at the bottom of our grid, versus the more complex it is and the higher we go out here, well, now we need to think about it a little bit more. How complex is it? Is it something that fits into my core competencies and I want to keep or not? And then also on the bottom axis here are strategic importance of the process. So again, if it's not something that's really our core to our strategy, if it's a back office process, then it's something that I might be able to let others take care of, versus if it's something that's really the core of my non-substitutable value-add competitive advantage, well, that's less likely to be on the outsourcing side. And so you can see how the upper right quadrant here is really leading you to those knowledge-intensive processes that you probably more want to retain in-house, versus in the bottom left corner where you're really looking at keep these, or rather, you don't need to keep these. They might be something that is eligible for an outsourcing decision. Along with this graph, there are some other things I mentioned previously, briefly, like things that do require specialized knowledge. So that's something outside of even this graphic that you want to try and assess, where does that fit? If it requires specialized knowledge that I retain in my resources, then that easily falls up here. But if it requires specialized knowledge that maybe it's very difficult for me to have that knowledge, but it's very easy for a third-party vendor who makes that their business to have that knowledge, maybe that's still something that I want to utilize. Likewise, we talked about turnaround time and being able to utilize alternate time zones and things like that. That is going to play in as you're assessing these, to also see where that might fall in this grid. So outsourcing considerations, the first thing to really look at here is risk. And this is a really key component there are a lot of different categories of risks that we want to be sure to be aware of. Legal and compliance risks. If I am going to switch to an outsourcing vendor, am I still going to be covered for all of the legal liabilities that I need to make sure that I am covering? And when you're looking at these risks, it's not so much a yes, no, oh, it's too risky, I'm not going to do it. It very well might be a, okay, there is risk here, so I need to make sure to mitigate that risk and have something in place to make sure that I am still in compliance with everything necessary. It's not really necessarily a hard stop. It's just making sure that you're looking at everything right from the get-go. Same with things like security. You want to make sure that you have all of that in place. There are other risks also, operationally, for example, the risk of loss of organizational knowledge. You're doing everything in-house now. You have a lot of people that have that information. If I outsource it, am I going to lose that side of it? Well, there are ways to mitigate that as well, of course, and you want to accommodate proper transition methodologies for knowledge transfer and things like that. So you definitely can cover these risks as long as you are prepared for them at the start. Reputational, want to touch on that one there real quick. That's definitely one that can factor in. If I outsource and I end up laying off people as a result, how does that make me look in the community? How does that make me look in the media? Or do I want to go into those kinds of risks to my reputation? And there are also ways to mitigate things like that. Maybe I need to make sure that I am partnering with a vendor who also has a very good reputation. Maybe there's an option for rebadging. So where, if you're not familiar with what that is, the outsourcing vendor may be able to come onto your site and actually open up their facility or start their work where they are managing the operation, but they're doing it in your facility. So it's just a matter of changing over your employees to their management. So nobody really got laid off. They just have different managers at this point. So there are a lot of actions that can be taken to make sure that you don't end up in a reputational kerfuffle that you want to avoid. Of course, when you're looking at, do I want to outsource, in addition to risk, you have to look at the cost benefit. You want to draw out in great detail the ROI for where you are going to fall if you do go down the outsourcing path. So a couple of steps in doing that here, but the bottom line is make sure that you are looking at all of the options. You want to make sure, you want to make sure that you are comparing alternatives. You know you're going to go into the outsourcing space looking at more than one vendor. So you want to see what that will look like. You want to look at quantifiable and non-quantifiable benefits. So of course, if you switch over a process, you want to be looking at what are the cost benefits I'm going to get there, the actual dollar savings that I'm going to see. But there are also non-quantifiable benefits that you need to pull into the assessment. For example, just an increase in customer service. If you are increasing the turnaround time as a result, how much happier will my customers be? What will that do for me? Will that allow me to get more customers more quickly? Things like that. You want to be sure to be looking at all of the benefits, not just the number value. And compare the alternatives and make sure you're reporting results in a documented fashion. So as you're hearing all of this, especially if you're not familiar with outsourcing, you may be thinking, gosh, this is a lot. It's a lot to think about. How do I make sure that I am thinking about everything? How do I make sure that I am looking at every risk that I need to look at and assessing every bit of it and looking at the cost-benefit analysis correctly? How do I know I picked the right process to outsource or not? Well, there is help out there. If you are one of those people that this sounds a little bit overwhelming to, there is definite help out there from a consultation perspective of vendors that specialize in just doing this kind of analysis and helping you understand what are the best steps for you if your goals are cost savings, if your goals are improve your customer service, if your goals are just reduce your workspace footprint. What are your options? And these consultants can come in and help you look at your processes. Is it best to just re-engineer what you have? Is there some other way you can look at your labor workforce? Or is it something that's really good for outsourcing? So definitely highly recommended to seek assistance if you feel like it might be an overwhelming prospect to look at in the first place. When doing that, you definitely want to make sure to seek out a consultant that has demonstrated expertise. And, of course, you're checking out their background and their skills, and you want to make sure that everything checks out in terms of their expertise. But you also definitely want to look at, are they a good cultural fit? Whatever might be the outcome of their analysis, maybe you'll want to keep them on for a transition if you do end up going the outsourcing route, and you'll want to keep them for assistance there, or maybe you'll have other consulting engagements you want to engage them in. So you want to make sure that you really get along with the people. They really are somebody that you can like over a long period of time, so that you can also treat that as a partnership and reap the results there. So at this point, we've talked about assessing whether or not I as a company, I as a department within my company, think it may be a good idea to outsource one or more of my processes. So now it's time to look at selecting a provider. So you may not want to just have sourcing do it if you just pass it over to sourcing and say, hey, find me an outsourcing vendor. You may not get exactly what you're hoping to get. They may not know all of your requirements and build that into the request for proposal that they put out. They may treat it simply as a commodity without looking at all of the other perks and value that we've been talking about here. So you probably want to be part of the process, be part of the selection process. But then the question is, so how do I select? I have a lot of different vendors that maybe compare in a lot of arenas, maybe have differences. How do I go about selecting? So here's just sort of a quick summary of how that works. So the first step is develop the RFP. So you want to make sure that you don't neglect to document the right requirements. So in detail, you want to make sure that you're providing enough information in there, first of all, so that you get a real quote, so that you get real solutioning information back from the vendors that you solicit a response from. And so you want to even get into some of the nitty-gritty of your processes to make sure you're including enough detail and to make sure that you're asking the right questions. You want to cover everything that you would expect them to respond to, that you would expect them to be involved in the coming years. You want to include that in your RFP. So, for example, soliciting information about how they might improve processes year over year, how there might be mutual benefits in the future. Solicit the idea from the prospective vendors on their solutioning ideas and how they would contribute to the various arenas. Also, so then at that point you want to put together a very strong evaluation process. So you want to utilize a cross-functional team to develop the selection criteria. So here it's really important that you're not developing this in a silo. What might be very important to you might be very different than what's important to your IT team or to your compliance team. So you want to make sure to bring all the stakeholders together to talk about your criteria and really build that list and the evaluation process to determine what is going to bring that vendor to the top of my list. And so just a quick example here, you can do that very easily by using, for example, a Six Sigma tool that's often used, a prioritization matrix, where you can put some calculated objectivity to something that might be otherwise just be considered an opinion, a subjective opinion of, do I like this vendor or do I not? We can actually put some objective scores around that so that you have some data to make your final decision on. Also, when you're selecting the list of providers to solicit responses from, don't overlook your lesser known providers. Don't overlook the smaller providers. Oftentimes those organizations may be poised to give you even more flexible targeted services than some of the larger equivalents. that might have, a very structured path where you have to fit within their expectations in order to gain their services. You might get some closer to home real answers from the lesser known providers if you don't overlook them. Of course, you want to look at both sides of it and make sure that you're evaluating both, but you want a good range of vendors that you invite to the table. Then as a last piece here to consider, you probably want to consider a hands-on evaluation process. So this is one thing that we have seen be incredibly successful through the years, and the most successful outsourcing engagements we have seen are generally started with a hands-on evaluation process. So that can look like a couple of things. It can be a production pilot, where you actually invite a couple of the top vendors to enact in an actual pilot where they're processing some production work, and you can see exactly how they're doing it and the reports that come out of it, and the actual results. You can see it firsthand. Or you could do something like a consulting services engagement where you invite the top running vendors options to come and see your processes hands-on and give you really tailored solutions based on some time that you afford them to get to know your processes. The two biggest reasons, the biggest reasons to go into this kind of engagement is really to get to know the vendors, because again, you're looking at a long-term partnership. You're not looking at a relationship that you're going to end in a year or 3 years down the road. You want it to be fruitful through the coming years. So you want to pick somebody that you like. You pick somebody that is going to share your company culture, that is going to share your views on communication, and that is going to give the kind of individual attention that you may want. Somebody who looks like they are very passionate about what they do versus somebody who's just trying to give minimum service. So those kinds of things are really the things that you learn by getting hands-on with the prospective vendors. Looking a little bit more in depth at the provider evaluation as you're wanting to determine, is this the right provider for me? Some of the no-brainers that you're looking at, of course, process expertise. Do they have the expertise to do what I need them to do? Do they have comprehensive quality initiatives? Are they going to make sure that I get the continued quality always that I expect to get? Do they have well-established security controls? Proactive disaster recovery and business continuity policies. A lot of times this is forgotten. A lot of times people don't think about it, but you want to. You need to make sure that you have, right from the get-go, an understanding of, okay, if there's a natural disaster and the building goes down and can't function, what is my expected return to service time? And can this particular vendor provide me that return to service time? Do I want to be back up and running in an hour because that's the kind of processing I'm doing, that's what my customers need? Can I wait 24 hours? Can I wait 48 hours? What is my return to service requirement? And can this vendor give me what I need in that area? A well-defined transition methodology. This one is absolutely critical. It's not a haphazard trial and error type, well, okay, let's transition this over and learn it. There is a definite process, a very detailed process behind how you would transition from you doing all the work in-house to being able to hand over those functions to an outsourcing vendor and be able to have that all processed successfully. So you want to get into the nitty-gritty of the methodologies that your prospective vendors use so that you can really understand and get a good comfort level of how that's going to work. With that transition methodology, you want to make sure that they are giving you good visibility throughout the entire process. It's your function, it's your process. You definitely have the right to see what's going on and know what's going on. So does their methodology give you the visibility that you should have? And a proven track record of success. Are they, when they go into partnership with their companies, are they losing their clients every other year and they're always having to switch, or do they have some long-standing partnered relationships that their partners keep coming back to them, and so it's obvious that you would be able to forge the same relationship with them. So those are sort of the first level no-brainers that you definitely need to look at. And so I submit to you that there's another level above that that you also want to keep in mind. And so these are the things like creativity and flexibility and sensitivity to cultural elements, and last but not least, their passion for excellence. Do you want mediocrity? Do you want, yes, they make their service level agreement requirements, or do you want people who are really, they're showing up every day, and not just showing up, they're going the extra mile with that passion for excellence to really get you where you want to be. And that's where getting to know them is really going to give you the insight on this upper tier of qualifications that you might want to be looking at. This is just a brief screenshot to share with you about where you can see the URL at the bottom of the screen to get the full PDF, but this just gives you a really good checklist if you go down this road of outsourcing, that you can go through and just see, A, B, C, does the vendor do this? Does the vendor have this? Can I expect this from my vendor? Just to make sure that you're thinking through all of the questions that you should be thinking through. This gives you a little bit more of a detailed look at the kinds of questions that you want to make sure you're thinking through. So at this point, we have selected an outsourcing provider, and now we want to make sure that we are going to make that partnership, the engagement, a success. So what does that take? 3 key elements to making that a success. So the first is a strong contract. So that the contracting process is not just, I have a pre-made something and, we sign on the dotted line and that's it. There's a lot that goes into that contracting process. So you want to make sure it is clearly documenting the scope of the functions that are covered. For sure, all roles, responsibilities, and expectations in very great detail, so there's no question about later, well, I expected my vendor to do this, but now they're not, and we don't really know what to do with that. You want to make sure you're detailing that out in the contract. You want to define solid change control. So yes, you're defining the scope, but we all know things change. We all know goals can change, purpose can change. And so you want to make sure you have something in place that's going to allow you to manage through change in the coming years. So you define that change control policy right from the start so everybody knows what to expect if your corporate goals do change or even specific functions do change. Define a clear escalation process. So you want to have something that makes you feel very, very comfortable about if there is an issue, if there is an error, what's going to happen? How are you going to be informed of that? How are you going to be kept informed as the resolution comes to be? So you want to have that in place. All objectives and measures, so we'll talk a little bit more in detail about measures, but that definitely needs to be in the contract. And then, of course, negotiate appropriate incentives. So incentives have proven to be, in our experience, very good tools for just souping up your contract and making it a little bit more successful, to put in incentives. And again, mutual benefits on both sides as you go through, whether it's year-over-year savings or something of that sort, but you want to work with your outsourcing partner to really negotiate the right incentives to include there. A strong transition plan. So I mentioned that a moment ago, definitely a key component to outsourcing success. So you want to have a joint transition team. So again, it's not just you're going to close your eyes and hand it to them and expect them to do it. You want people from your side, people from their side, all working together regularly over the span of the transition plan to make sure it all comes out to a good outcome. You want to put in specific criteria, success criteria, and phase gates into the timeline and the plan to make sure, okay, we're not going to move on to the next step until we've made sure at this X point we have everything in place that we know should be in place. And you're going to see, if you have a strong transition plan, you're going to see several of those phase gates along the way, just to make sure things don't get way down the road and all of a sudden it's all going to fall apart and fail because you forgot something back at the beginning. Risk analysis and mitigation, of course, through this process you've already been looking at that, and so you want to build that into your transition plan as well to make sure that you're covering those elements. And then, of course, your disaster recovery and business continuity is an important piece of that transition plan as well. Are you going to set up a second site? Are you going to set up a second shift, overstaff for a bit to make sure something's covered during the actual transition? Are you going to keep labor on both sides to make sure everything is covered? How are you going to make sure that you have the business continuity that you need and you're not going to have any effect on the product you're taking to your customer? And then the strong measurement structure. So this piece is often, it's not usually forgotten. There's usually something in there, but it's not often very detailed. And this piece is probably the most important piece to being able to measure your success and ensure that you get there. So it generally requires much more detail than it starts with at the beginning. So why do we want to measure? That's the first question. So we talked about at the beginning, we're identifying all our corporate core competencies, our corporate strategy, all the things we want to achieve. Well, now we want to make sure that we're actually achieving those. So we're going to build a measurement structure that tells us, are we in line with all of those things? Also, we want to be able to identify issues early. If we're measuring on a monthly basis, weekly basis, daily basis, if we're seeing how things are functioning regularly, then we're going to know right away as soon as there's a problem. If we don't have that measurement system in place, or maybe we're only looking every few months, or if there was a problem, we're not going to catch it until much later on, and it's going to be a lot harder to fix at that point. And also, as we see things happening, we can make proactive adjustments if there's changes in the market, if we're not seeing the expected volumes that we expected to see originally. But if we're measuring these things, we can adjust for them in advance so that we don't have negative effects as a result. So with this, the key to measuring is defining really good SLAs. So what does a good service level agreement stipulate? So it's going to tell you the exact service that's going to be provided with details of exactly, how you might stipulate exactly how it needs to be done, or for sure the exact output that you're going to get. So you want to be detailed in the description. It's going to say the time frame that the service has to be delivered in. So is this something that I need within the hour? Every hour I need this, or is it something they have 48 hours to do? Definitely not a gray area. It needs to be black and white. Also, the quality and the standard of service that's expected. So with the quality, I urge you to remember it's not just understanding the quality of it, but how are you going to audit that quality? Are you going to have somebody on your side doing random inspections? Do you expect your vendor to be monitoring quality regularly and reporting it daily? How is that audit going to happen so that for sure you have the tools that you need, you have the data you need to be able to assess the quality? That's important as well. And the framework intended to measure the performance. So everything around that specific service and what it's going to look like in the end, you're going to define that all in your SLAs. And so you possibly have many different services. So you're going to have these details outlined for each service that you're going to engage with your vendor on. But really important to detail that out. And then finally, it's a matter of closing the loop with those measurements. So you're going to look back again at the vision and strategy that you outlined at the very beginning, and then you'll look at it in a few different categories. So first is measuring the financial benefits. Of course, we all, it's no avoiding it. You're expecting financial benefits from an outsourcing engagement, so you're looking at measurements like reduced operating costs. So what was I spending before? What am I spending now? You want to be measuring that. Year-over-year savings. Is my savings this year better than it was last year with this partner and better than it was the year before with this partner? Am I seeing those gains? You want to measure the customer relationship. So that was a big, big part of it. So, for example, customer complaint resolution time. So how quickly are they solving when I have an issue and I bring it to them? Does it take them a week to address it? Does it take them a week to make me happy? Or are they right on it and they're really helping me meet my needs? Escalation availability, same thing. You want to really measure how that relationship is going. Also, you want to measure the operational effectiveness. So here's where you're getting back to the very plain and simple SLA components. So is my turnaround time what I expected? Is my quality what I expected? This is sort of the baseline of good service. Did I get what I needed there? But then you take it to the next step to measure the strategic value. So continuous improvement. Am I getting continuous improvement? Am I getting innovation where I want it? Are we really growing as partners? How does the future look for us? So just to sum it all up, as we're coming to the end of our webinar, and hopefully there will be time for a couple of questions here. Here we have really just the summary of all the checklist of what we're going through to get to from determining, is this the way I want to go? I understand what outsourcing is now. I've engaged the right people on my side. Does it support the strategy? If it does, let me go ahead and launch a strong RFP process. Let me get to know my vendors. And then if I do award this as an outsourcing engagement, let me make sure that I'm building a solid contract and sharing rewards with my partnership for long-term success. So we can take it to questions if there are any questions, Jewel. Hopefully we have a few minutes to hit a few of those.
Yes, we've got a couple in the queue so far, and I'd just like to remind everybody that they can ask questions by accessing that window on the screen that is labeled questions. The first question we have from one of the participants is they are wondering if there's possibly an RFP template that could be shared with any of the participants today.
Absolutely. There are, and there are different levels of RFP templates depending on the particular industry or service. We do have a few that I would be happy to send. So my information is on the slide showing there, and so if you want to send me a note, I'd be happy to get out some templates to you because there are definite, and some are more complex, some are less complex, so you'll want to look at a few before you decide what to use, but absolutely there are templates for that.
Okay, and then the next question is they are wondering what constitutes a strong contract for these types of services?
So the strong contract is really where you are looking at, did I cover all of these elements that we're talking about? Did I detail out exactly what the service is? Did I just say, okay, you're going to process my documents? That's a very high level example. Or did I say all of the details of how those documents are expected to be processed? In what turnaround time do I expect them to be processed? Am I detailing out the various document types that I have to deal with? Am I detailing out the different data elements that have to be addressed on these documents and what is to come of the data that comes with those documents? But then taking it a step further, not just in the very baseline service level, but also where else am I going to go with this process in the future? Do I expect to innovate this service in the future? Do I expect to have additional, maybe I'm going to automate X percentage within the next coming year, and the next year after that I'm going to automate an additional percentage. Am I going to, drive my documents to the web, and so I'm going to work with my partner to do those kinds of things. So your contract is really going to cover not just the short-term services, but also a longer-term outlook of those services. And once that's defined in detail, then you want to also include how am I going to measure, did I accomplish what I outlined? So that goes to all the measurements that we were talking about. And then really in the end, so right now, actually there's a study that shows that about 41% of some global, 170 global companies that were surveyed actually cited the vendor having skin in the game is actually the #1 insurance for success of the outsourcing contract. So that skin in the game is really, are they putting, is my vendor actually, putting their stuff on the line? Are they really going the extra mile to help me? Are they, reaping rewards out of this also? And so you want to make sure that your contract is also, in writing, documenting that kind of thing. That's contractually stipulating that they have financial incentive to meet or surpass the outsourcing relationship goals, and then maintain the regular contract to, troubleshoot as necessary. So you want all of those elements in there.
Okay, and we have another question from a participant wondering if you have any restrictions on them being able to share your PowerPoint once they're able to get a copy of it.
I would be happy to have it shared. If I would ask if you would, just contact me and let me know who you're sharing it with and where it's going. In which case, I would be happy to share it on the forum if you could just do me that honor and let me know who you are and where it's going, please.
Okay, and it looks like we have one more question here. Is there any average cost savings or increased expectations for outsourcing? For example, is outsourcing generally a 5% reduction or 10% increase to in-house employment, or does it vary by sector or industry?
Yeah, they're actually answering their own question there. It very much varies by sector and by industry. Complexity of what you determine that you're going to outsource as well. So it's a difficult question to answer. There are some guidelines. Horses for Sources is actually a very good resource for a lot of information about outsourcing, and they have published a lot of studies answering some of those types of questions. I do have additional information on specific sectors if our attendee would like to get into a little bit more detail about that. I would love to sit down and talk about that. So again, feel free to contact me and we can go through any of that.
Okay, and that's all the questions that we had in the queue. So on behalf of the ISM Indirect Services Group, thank you, Nina, for presenting today. I would also like to thank everyone who's participated and taken the time out of their schedules to attend today's web seminar. And just a reminder for those of you wishing to receive a CEH form for today's event, please remember to email your request to Lynn Marstiller, who will be sending you a link to the online evaluation survey later today. So thank you everyone again, and hope you all have a great day.
Thank you.